Welcome to the Stanford MBA two-generational wisdom bridge across 30 years. I'm your host, Catherine Keogh McLennan from the MBA class of 1995 of Stanford. In each episode, I bring together one of my classmates, now in our 60s, give or take, and a member of the class of 2025, now in their 30s, give or take, and about to graduate into an entirely different world than we graduated in 1995. Back then, we finished our MBAs just as the internet was emerging. Today's grads are stepping into a future shaped by artificial intelligence, uncertainty, and we hope that we express possibility. These conversations bridge generations, share lessons, and spark reflections on leadership, life, and what's next. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by Glover Lawrence from the Stanford MBA Class of 1995, my classmate, and Vikram Kanodia from the Class of 2025. Glover is a highly respected mergers and acquisitions strategist and financial advisor executive with over 30 years of experience helping founders, CEOs, and boards drive growth across the technology sector. Calm under pressure and pragmatic in approach, Glover has built a career structuring, negotiating, and integrating major transactions, from leading corporate development at AspenTech and driving a $12 billion deal with Emerson Electric, to advising global technology firms through his work at Oracle, Hambrecht Quist, and his own firm, McNamee Lawrence. Today, he continues this work as the founder of North Hollow Advisors and a partner at FounderPartners, while also serving on the boards of innovative technology companies like Arundo Analytics and Prevu3D. Vikram is a second-year MBA student at Stanford's Graduate School of Business with a dynamic background in mergers and acquisitions, corporate strategy, and innovation. Prior to Stanford, Vikram worked at EY Parthenon in New York, where he led the operationalization of major corporate divestitures across retail, healthcare, and industrial sectors. He then served as manager in the CEO's office at Datamatics, driving mergers and acquisitions, go-to-market strategy, and helping build out the company's Gen AI practice. Passionate about building value through business and technology, Vikram also brings creativity and perspective as an avid musician, photographer, and wildlife enthusiast. After graduation, he'll return to India to help lead his family's technology business, celebrating its 50th year. In this conversation, Glover and Vikram offer a fascinating intergenerational view of the evolution of technology, leadership, and entrepreneurship. They explore how the rise of AI, shifting global markets, and the power of resilience and intention are reshaping what it means to build strong, lasting enterprises today. Vikram, where are you at this moment?
I'm on campus. It is still class 3, which means I got in a good round of golf this morning on the course.
Okay, now that's the first time I've heard. I've interviewed about 17 of your classmates, and no one has mentioned golf. So what's going on? Are you the only one out there?
There were at least 15 of us out on the course this morning. It was really fun. You found the 17 of us. Probably the only 17 people at GSB were not on the golf course.
That's great. I love it. Glover, did you play golf when you were at Stanford?
I took golf, as did my fiance/wife, who was also at the GSB at the same time. And so we weren't golfers beforehand, but we both took classes, and she got to take advantage of getting priority her first year and her second year because her last name went from a B to an L because he chose to take my last name. She took advantage of that, since the rest of it was a real pain in the ass for any woman to change her name.
I love it.
If at least she was going to capitalize on that. And she had to move her box at the GSB from her own, where it was her first year, to being next to mine her second year.
I love that. So what? Vikram, in those days, we were just we had a little bit of email. We didn't really have the internet.
Yeah.
It was coming.
Yeah.
There was a thing called Netscape
Yeah.
went public. So we had pigeonholes. And I don't think you guys even know what pigeonholes are, but they're basically a whole wall of boxes, essentially, that each of us, one each. And how did she get a new one? She would have had to shift everybody down, Glover.
They shifted basically because they have to shift it's all alphabetical. So when an entire new class comes in, they have to redo them anyway. It wasn't separated by class. It wasn't first year, second year. It was just the entire GSB by last name. And so when she came back, so Vikram, my wife and I had been dating before we went to business school, got engaged, and then got married between our first and second year of business school.
That is.
And so she spent her first year with the last name, her maiden name was Bowman, and then, took my last name, which is Lawrence. And then we came back second year when we were married. She switched. And that's why she had a B, as her last name for the first year for golf priority, and an L for the next year, and got priority in one semester. So we took lessons. But
That's it.
Anyway. So when you mentioned golf, it had been a bit.
Yeah. And Glover, you guys might have been the first wedding. I know people were married when they came into business school, but you might have been the first wedding to happen.
I presume so, only because literally got married between our first and second year. So there were people who showed up who had already married. There were a couples who showed up, and of course a couple who developed out of the class. But I think we were the only ones who were married during business school, especially who were classmates. There may have been others that I just wasn't aware of. We don't plans, but
we don't know. And I was talking to one of your classmates, Vikram, who also got into the business school with her partner. And I was like, God, that's lucky. What if one of you guys didn't get into the business school?
There's a few actually in the class, which I've always surprised and impressed by. Not only did you both get in, but you both picked each other who were good enough to get in, right? Which is great talent.
Glover, where are you right now? And what are you up to today? And by the way, we have to hear about Glover was at the top of my LinkedIn feed today, which is kind of coincidental. Wow. So I think it's a very good vibe. So tell us where you are and what you're up to.
So I'm dialing in from my home in Lexington, Massachusetts, where my wife and I have classmate, also 95, have been for 20 some odd years, 22, 23, whatever. And so that's where I'm physically. Career-wise, I have been doing more consulting type of things. And in fact, today, ironically enough, just officially announced the launch of an advisory firm.
Congratulations.
On LinkedIn. Thank you. I've been doing some work, but so I figure I'm LinkedIn launched now, if that's a thing. And it's a continuation of what I've done before. So for the last 15, 16, whatever, starting back in 2008, I'd moved from the investment banking world to the corporate development world. And so having run corporate development for a couple of public companies, I basically had a very, very steep learning curve from becoming an agent to becoming somebody running something. Needless to say, I learned a lot, mostly by screwing things up and falling into ditches and twisting my ankle, and realized that there needed to be a lot of processes put in place and thinking about it. And so at this point, I've got a lot of best practices and experiences that I'm now focused on helping companies to learn from. So rather than going back and just running corporate development, the clients I've worked with, and I've worked with a couple so far, is basically saying, like, here's my view of how you do it. Here are best practices. Here's the things to avoid, et cetera. So I've got materials, and I've got a focus on that. So professionally, it's not full time. I'm doing other things as well, advising companies. I sit now on the board of a couple small software companies. Most of my career has been in and around software and technology, before business school and after business school, and always kind of that intersection of industry-wise technology with a predominance on software, and then kind of and transactions and strategy. So strategy work or M&A, acquisition, sell side financing, but a lot of it's more the strategic. How do you do some inorganic things?
What was it about today that is particularly significant? Glover, has your consulting company reached a mass that you're ready to announce it to the world, or?
There's a little bit of that. So I'm doing, as I think many of our classmates are, a variety of things. I had been doing this and had a client that finished up a month or two ago. And I wanted to take some time to really get it buttoned up rather than do it a little haphazard.
Yep.
And then it took me a while
Yeah.
because I've got other clients that I'm doing stuff with.
Got it.
And so it happened to be today, mostly because I don't want to announce things on a weekend. So it's the middle of the week. Just good practice is you're not, sending out emails and doing stuff on a, Friday afternoon. And so it wasn't that, April 23rd was inarguably auspicious per se. But it was middle of the week and get some announcements out. And part of it was just get going.
Fantastic. And Vikram, so this is a terrible question for second year, but you're going to be well practiced at answering it, right? So you've got a couple of weeks
Awesome.
left till June, maybe again. And so what are you thinking? Which happens after business school?
Oh, that's an easy question. But before I get to that, I do want to sort of commend you on the matchmaking that you did, Catherine, because right before before the GSB, after undergrad, I used to be a strategy and transactions consultant at EY as well. So Glover and I matched on that, and then right after that, I was at software and going back to software. So we're a good match on that as well. So in that sense, you sort of checked every box of my career. So right before the GSB, I was in Mumbai working at the software business that my family runs. So we're sort of IT consultancy, software services, tech services business. So I was helping run that, and post GSB, I'm going back to go do that again, which was probably the plan from day one, and continue to be excited about it. So happy to go do that again. My grandfather started it. My dad runs it now, and my brother and I both will be working there June onwards, and this year, in July, we'll hit our 50th anniversary. Started in 1975.
I'm honored to talk to a 50th year. Where are you guys headquartered?
So HQ is in Mumbai. Most of the business happens out of the US,
Okay.
but as the typical outsourcing model would suggest, HQ and a lot of the headcount is in Mumbai, and then around India. But most of the clients are the larger enterprises across the US.
Wow. Okay, we're going to have to hear about this software. So, Glover, you're talking to somebody that should have been in the high technology club that met in the cafeteria during business school. What was I thinking?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Mosaic and Netscape, because when I left GSB, I actually went into investment banking, which I'd done beforehand. I went to work for a firm called Hambrecht Quist, which is a Bay Area tech-focused investment bank focused on software. And when I got there, they were working on the Netscape IPO. So I didn't personally work on it, but so I actually have at my home one of the original boxes of software with the disks inside it that you would load up, a browser on your on your PC back then. And software back then, we were just really getting into the client server area. You had big mainframes and all that stuff, and this whole client server thing was taking everyone by storm. And obviously Oracle had been around already for 20 years when I left at GSB, because it was started as a project for the, CIA for doing database and so forth. And it'd been around and well established. It's not like software was just getting going. As an industry, it was transforming a lot. And from a financial perspective, there were big changes over the years. If you look at, for example, the financial services industry that was serving the software industry for a long time, traditional big Wall Street banks just didn't bank technology, especially software, because the idea was you'd take them public and they'd never raise money again. So what was the business for? You didn't care. You don't need to raise much equity. You take them public and then they just start spitting off cash and never raise money again. And that was true for a period of time. And that's why there were a lot of tech-focused investment banks and VCs that started in the Silicon Valley area, because that was the world they were in and they served it. But as these companies got much bigger, and started becoming so mature, the finance industry realized that there were other essentially ways to generate fees from a finance standpoint. But basically, they could borrow money in different ways. They could start leveraging up. And so as we came out of the GSB, this transformation was just getting going. The internet boom was just starting. It wasn't a thing, as you know, Kath. We had classmates, who started eBay and other things like that. So we were kind of at the cusp of this internet thing starting, but also the extant large technology industry was going through big changes too. And so all of a sudden, Wall Street, the traditional big banks came in big because they started seeing all the fees and the opportunity to finance these companies. Anyway, so there was enormous changes going on in technology, and there's always been this push and pull between the startups and the big incumbents, which is going on again with AI, especially generative AI, but AI generally. But Vikram, you clearly obviously know this background too. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how things are different, how you see them changing.
I mean, just from hearing you talk, I was thinking about, when you guys got out, as you said, I know some of your classmates started eBay, getting into the whole thing. And this is pre .com bust. This is pre Y2K and pre .com. And obviously there was a turnaround that happened, I guess, shortly after you guys got out of school. Not too much time, but right post that, it's never looked down since then, right?
Except for 2000 and 2001.
Yeah, exactly. So Y2K and then .com bust, and then everything after that, everything that survived that sort of did well in that sense. Honestly, all of us, the tech software discussion at GSB is, I would say, more than half the class is in that space or touching that space in some manner. I'm taking a class that's taught by Jeff Immelt this quarter, and he's the CEO of GE, and he asked at a dinner session, whose career is going to be, or who's going to be building a career in AI. And I sort of want to take the opportunity to mention to him is like, every career is going to be built with AI. There's going to be not a single career that's not going to be touched with AI. And that's sort of the reality that I think we're looking at, we're getting out of school into. A couple of classmates have already started AI startups, both in terms of like using AI to help sort of build new types of companies. In our own company, we're sort of looking at how we can do software development better with AI, how we can do recruitment better with AI, how we can do governance better with AI. And all of those things, it's just going to be sort of all penetrative, like a database. I keep thinking this is sort of the biggest thing we've seen since the internet.
50 years of a company history. And that is, you got to start telling stories and teach the classes yourself, don't you think?
I mean, I feel super, super privileged and super excited to be able to tell the stories. I think it's a perspective that's been baked into me since I was a child, obviously. And I've heard all these stories about how Y2K happened and how .com bust happened and then how 2008 happened. And obviously I was a child and not really experiencing it as as you guys did. But I've heard the stories a lot. But being able to sort of draw that line through where we are now and where I think we're going to keep going forward and where we'll all see it go in the next 5 or 10 years is incredible, right? And honestly, being at the GSB is such a huge privilege that in many ways you get to be at the center of what's happening. The speakers that come, the types of discussions we have, the access to people and CEOs and business leaders that come, and that everybody's talking about technology in a way. And when I hear it sort of with peaked ears because I know I'm going to build a career in this space. So it's just been an incredible opportunity to be here. And the ability to engage deeply with all of these stories from my past and from what the future is going to look like has been, really, really something amazing.
And is most of your career in Mumbai, or did you also come and work in the US or other countries?
So I worked I was a strategy transactions consultant at EY in New York. So I spent some time there, and then prior to that, I did my undergrad at Carnegie Mellon. So I've been in the States for 10-ish years. Given most of our clients are in the US, I expect to be here 4 or 5 times a year easily. So will continue to remain the backyard.
Okay, so Glover, going back, it's interesting. One of the transitions I heard you say was being on the investment banking transaction side and then going to corporate development. You get to see the views from both sides. Is that right? Like, what do you learn from that transition?
So, I went into banking out of undergrad when it was kind of this cool thing on Wall Street, being an analyst and do all that. And many of our classmates, I don't know what it is still today, but many of them had either come out of investment banking or management consulting to the GSB. And I had been a history major undergrad. So for me to go to Wall Street was a bit of a drinking from fire hose anyway. And learning it and going back to business school is essentially trying to put much more framework, much more perspective and understanding. So I thought, I'm setting myself up to learn a lot. As with any job, you learn a very narrow slice of things and you learn a component of it, especially to stay at it. So I learned a lot about how to get transactions done from a process standpoint, from a positioning standpoint, from a valuation standpoint, from a negotiation standpoint, all those things. But if you think about the scope of what a transaction for M&A specifically, I think a choice of a company to do something inorganic, to add somebody to the company, to add another business to it, or to sell it, whatever, but especially to add, there's so much that happens before they even engage with a potential target, when they engage with targets, how they engage with them. And then after the deal closes, there's a classic line, investment bankers that get involved. As soon as the deal closes, they walk away. Well, I went over to the other side where I had to get involved early on to figure out which targets to go after and figure out all that stuff. But then the real work started after the deal closed, or at least I kind of thought it did. I could go on for a very long time about all the mistakes I made, not realizing all the things I actually had to do as head of corporate development to make things successful internally. For most companies, nobody thinks about buying companies other than, say, corporate development and a couple of key executives. Everyone else has a full-time job. And it's not that they're not capable, intelligent, whatever, but they're already busy. So there were so many things I didn't realize I just had to get people to do, not because they're not smart. They just need to be said, hey, this is a priority. And so I messed so many things up initially. So the learning curve was really steep. And while there are certain attributes of any acquisition that are quote unquote the same, meaning there's certain stages and things, what really comes over time is a realization where on this particular situation, it's much more of a people issue than a technology issue. Or in this one, the technology evaluation is going to be really, really important because it's really small. Or in this one, it's going to be much more about the go-to-market capabilities because it's already got an engine, but how do we integrate? So the sophistication and capabilities and making it successful are much more about appreciating who the buyer is, what they want to do, and what stage the company that's being bought is, and how to bring those things together, as opposed to, how do I decide how much is, what the valuation is and what the contracts are. I mean, that's just such a small slice. So you can see with that breadth of stuff, the amount of things I could mess up is large.
I'm so glad that you talked about people, and that's what I've been doing. So 25 years. And I've been involved with a lot of M&As. I get really cross when the CEO comes and says, we're just on the brink of going IPO or acquiring. I'm like, why did you call me months ago? So many people will lose their jobs because 2 CEOs, 2 COOs, 2 CIOs. Anyway, let's go back to India. I always watch the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times so I can have perspectives of the world. One of them today was a Chinese manufacturing. This is not a country that the common person in the US understands, but we aren't hearing about India.
That's a great question. So obviously the outsourcing wave did extremely well for us. We built our business in the same sort of space. What the reason that you don't hear about India is both a little bit disappointing and a good thing in a way. There's a funny saying that some people say that India has a great way to disappoint both the pessimist and the optimist. And in part, the reality is that there can be a lot of exciting things happening that are not happening. But in part, there's a lot of exciting things happening more silently. I think India's become very internally focused, not in a bad way, just over the last 10-ish years, the Indian consumer has matured in a way that they're able to consume a lot more. So a lot of India's focus has turned to the Indian consumer who's being able to sort of drive the economy and becoming a more consumption-focused economy, which is why the outside world, I guess, is hearing less, but we hear a lot more that's going on. It is true that in terms of a lot of international trade policy and international business policy, we could be doing better. Post-COVID, when we were in a China plus one thought process world, India should have been literally standing there with the doors open, saying, everybody come in. Everybody who leaves China should have defaulted to India. They did not. And that was probably just bad government planning. But overall, I mean, the macros for India are looking very good in the sense that economy is doing well, consumer spending is going to keep increasing, both because people have more money, but also the culture is changing to become a more consumption-centric economy. And I don't know how much of the history of India you guys are familiar with, but we were sort of colonized for hundreds of years by the British, and then before that, other colonizers and that sort of left its mark on the Indian psyche in a sense that Indians have always preferred security over growth. And for the first time, I think in the last maybe generation, my generation is probably the first generation which is willing to take risk. Or the risk-taking ability is higher, which means that they're looking for growth over security. That's when you get, spending, like savings rates used to be over 50%, just because of the security of having that safety bucket or the safety net. People like that. But now for the first time, savings rates are nowhere close to that. And that sort of helps pump the economy as well, right? So I think in the next 15, 20 years, like India's the place to be. There's not too many economies that's going to give double-digit $1 trillion worth of growth in a decade, 2 decades.
Consumer-driven technology is exactly what Thomas Friedman it was with Ezra Klein, New York Times, Glover. When you look at the technology in the United States now, will technology slow in the capital that's available to them? As you look at China and India coming up, what's the view when you're advising corporate development?
At this point, everything's a bit of a guess and a what if.
Yeah.
So, because policies that are being put forward by the current administration are new enough and potentially very disruptive that everything is conjecture right now. I can make conjecture along the following lines. If you look at major trends, the amount of innovation, technology innovation in the United States has been extreme for decades, post-World War II and so forth, driven by the Cold War and the move towards development for military purposes and geopolitical purposes that spun off into the creation of Silicon Valley, et cetera.
It's DARPA funding, right? That was DARPA funding.
DARPA funding and a whole bunch of others. And then you combine that with a high trust society with good legal infrastructure to enable risk taking in these environments and a willingness to take risk, particularly on the West Coast, more so the traditional PE on the East Coast. There's just kind of I'm really shortcutting a whole bunch of, but there's a really vibrant reason for doing so and a self-reinforcing one relative to other cultures and other places in the world. It's not a matter of intelligence or capabilities, it's a matter of a mix of a whole bunch of things. What I personally worry about here, given the choice the current administration is making, is that the number of really talented people who have for generations now, decades, chosen to come to the United States for educational purposes to set up companies, who've already been dealing with increasing challenges, will now just say, the heck with it. I'm just not going to go to the US. You've already seen reports of China trying to recruit Chinese back to China. I live in Lexington, Massachusetts. I have a very international population. It's very liberal. During my walk, I regularly I have neighbors who are immigrants from both China and India, who I talk to and interact with if I'm out walking my dogs all the time. And so it's a pretty cosmopolitan and international area. There's the education system. I really worry about people no longer coming here for education and staying and driving innovation. I think the long-term implications are serious potential implications for people choosing to come, learn, and build their lives and families and career and innovate here. You see it also in the efforts to attack universities, to squelch their ability, people, foreign students to come with visas to study here. That is just, to me, cutting off our nose to spite our face, from a, kind of metaphorically speaking. So I am very concerned, and it won't show up like in a year or two.
Yeah.
We're talking like it's a generation of somebody saying, well, what happened? Why did the US quote unquote lose? It's like, well, we basically pissed off everyone and told them, don't come here.
I'm curious, Glover, whether you resonate with what I've noticed culturally a little bit, is that Americans love America, and I think that's absolutely an incredible feeling to have, and I think it's a great thing. I think at the same time, tend to discount other countries. So when Russia does something or the Chinese do something, it's like, oh, but it's Chinese, so you can't trust it. It may not be real. And for example, when the Russian vaccine came out, they're like, oh, but it's the Russian vaccine. It probably doesn't work. And I feel like that puts America sort of in a position to be blindsided.
I've had the advantage of working with many people and in a field, et cetera, who are generally surrounded by people who travel internationally anyway. Whether they've been where I worked or clients I worked with, they tend to be fairly cosmopolitan people who've worked overseas, traveled overseas, have colleagues that are immigrants or themselves immigrants. One client I have recently, is a Chinese woman who came over here 20, 30 years and bought a company she knew nothing about and built it into a great company, all on her own. So part of it, I have a very skewed view of things like that, and so it's hard for me to say that. Put it this way, I'm not seeing people who are totally discounting where things are coming from because they have an international experience or they themselves have been international. So I do admit that there is a skepticism about some of the things, particularly coming about out of authoritarian regimes. So when I hear claims and stuff coming out of Russia, I know enough and have read enough to know that, it doesn't mean that people aren't talented and so forth. The question is, what are the incentives in place? What are the mechanisms in place for safety around certain things? Mm-hmm. And I think we saw, particularly in the vaccine, to my knowledge, this is probably hearsay thing, is the actual efficacy was substantially lower than vaccines developed in other places. So it doesn't mean it was useless, but as from an efficacy standpoint, it wasn't as strong. Question certain data coming out of China, knowing that a lot of information is controlled. I don't have that same skepticism about stuff I hear coming out of India, because I know fundamentally it's a democracy,
right,
with a lot of openness about information. It is the most populous country in the world. And, I won't even begin to I've read enough about it and talked to people about it to have some informed point of view, but I don't at all have the same, skepticism or wondering about things I hear coming out of that. I've worked with enough Indians to have a healthy respect for the talent and the people and just seen the work. So I think it varies from country to country. So I am terribly disappointed about the potential for where things are headed. But I also work with Europeans who are sitting there saying, you know what, some of them share. So Northern Europeans, I've got some connection to Scandinavia and Norway in particular. My sister lives over there. I'm on a board of a country over there. A board of a company over in Norway. And so I have occasion to talk to Norwegians weekly, or at least Scandinavians. Actually, the CEO is a Swede, but and hear things about that. And obviously they're very aware of Russia and what's going on there, since they're in there knocking on the back door.
So what's interesting about that is the role of the government, Vikram, in India. How do you see that playing out? If it's a democracy, what's raising capital like? What's venture capital like? Is that changing?
That's a good question. I think one thing that's been big for the last 10, 12 years in India is the fact that we've had a majority government for the first time. Since independence, there was a very short periods of time where we had a single majority party government. So we always had coalition governments. And when you have a coalition government, they tend to be slightly less decisive, right? Because all parties have to be sort of kept happy. But for 10 years, we got a stretch of single party governance. And because of that, a lot of decisions were made, a lot of things moved a lot. And some big things came out of it, right? You guys may have heard of the Demonetization Act that happened, sort of where they changed the currency notes. So things like those sort of tend to hit the international news channels. But I think there's been fundamental business infrastructure that's put in place. So, for example, we have an extremely mature and well-distributed digital payments infrastructure. The fact that every villager in India can, on the phone, get money, and they don't have to go anywhere. They don't have to lose a day's worth of wage to go to a post office to pick up a check. Those things have moved a lot. And that's all heavily government driven, right? So building the fundamental business infrastructure in the country has been really big part of the government. We also have I would want to say, pretty liberal government in terms of they're encouraging startups, they're encouraging technology, they're encouraging all those things happening. And the government itself is very willing to adopt this technology. So we work with some of the governments setting up rail and metro, city metro infrastructure. We build all the ticketing systems for them, and they've been non-corrupt, extremely technology forward, very sort of well project managed in terms of getting city infrastructure in place, which has been extremely helpful. At the same time, India is sort of been built by large family enterprises to some degree, but large older enterprises to a large degree. The relationship with those people which run, companies that are worth tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, with the government is slightly more complex because the government has aimed to be sort of a people's government. And these people sort of don't qualify as the people's people in many ways. So that's a complex relationship, but I think that's being figured out in a bid to sort of reduce corruption, which is a good thing, in a bid to increase or distribute more of the entrepreneurial ecosystem through the country, which is a good thing. But as a result, I think a lot of foreign capital is flowing in, a lot of Indian capital is being churned. So we have all the big banks, all the big VC companies, all the big PE funds, all investing heavily in India. And I think that's only going to spur more of the business to churn, keep going. It will continue to be an export economy, which is a good thing as well.
With your clients, Glover, how do you see the AI influencing the way people think, the way people invest, the way people look at acquisitions?
Start from a very individual level.
Yeah.
So I can remember 2 years ago sitting in with a group of colleagues that I had joined in a pitch of a woman who was doing a startup. Was she at Stanford? Maybe I'm trying to remember this 2 years ago. And she was pitching some AI idea. And I just sat there listening to it. And I hadn't looked at ChatGPT or anything. This was 2 years ago. And I kept going like, how is this any different than Google? Like, how is this any different than just searching? Okay. So that was my initial exposure. Fast forward 2 years, I subscribe, I pay for ChatGPT, I pay for Perplexity. I use it all the time to do research, to help think through stuff, to make life more efficient, especially since I'm running my own small business, right? So it's not like I have no junior people to hand stuff off and say, go do this to. So I do it myself. Yeah. And so I've had to figure out, how do I be more efficient with this, that, or the other thing? My ability to interact with. Okay, that's a personal level. Even starting my own business, to like, what's a more efficient way to do this? To use it, I've bought, the AI add-ins for, not for Excel, but for PowerPoint, stuff like that. Fine, okay, I've gotten very fast with that. To the boards I'm sitting on, one in particular, which is essentially trying to figure out, they're trying to figure out how to create agentic workflows, and particularly creating a chat interface. And this is a company that sells into chemicals and oil and gas companies to create ways that engineers can use natural language interface to ask questions. Okay, that's a client, that's a board. So they're creating that ability to essentially use, obviously, an open source LLM, but obviously on a very targeted data set to be able to ask very sophisticated questions. That was not at all possible before. We had another client that's like, okay, I'm trying to partner with some people who are doing that. There's questions about, is the SaaS business model going away? Because there used to be, this idea, if you use, let's use Salesforce as an example of, perhaps the poster child for a SaaS business. There was an enterprise solution that basically said, look, you don't have to have it on-prem. You can do it off-prem, and we can create something that'll work for 80% of use case, and configure the rest of it, but it'll all be in the cloud. Okay, that people have marched down that path, made billions of dollars and so forth. Now people are saying, well, why would I pay those hefty per seat fees when I can create something much more bespoke for my business process at less cost using AI in ways I hadn't before? So everyone is sitting here figuring out, what does it mean to me? Every board is saying, what's our AI story? And all the CEOs like, we're on it. And then I'll go back to the rooms and go, what the fuck are we doing? Like, we don't know what we're doing and so, a year ago, I was sitting there saying all the services firm are going to be totally disintermediated because they sell hours. Well, that might be true. And you have much more insight than I do on this, Vikram, but if you're selling hours, as your business model, and the amount of time it takes for you to accomplish something is cut not just in half, but by 90%. Are you selling hours anymore? Okay, so that's one thing on a literally selling the butts and seat hours. Yep. There's a different thing between the consulting firms and the talent to actually go in, which is a higher level consulting, to say, let me help think about your business processes. How can I use this technology, this capability in my existing business process? Because businesses don't just throw stuff out and just throw it all away. especially in the
Yep.
industries I'm most familiar with the last decade, which are big, heavy asset industries, oil and gas and chemical, but it's true in banking and finance. The early stage startups and so forth, they can move very quickly, but every established business, I don't know, I'm making this number up. If you're more than 50 million in revenue, you've got a whole bunch of processes in place and software in place that you don't just suddenly, kick to the curb. So you're trying to figure it out. So everyone I'm interacting with is all trying to figure out, is my business model changing? Is my value proposition changing? Are my customers going to change on what they expect from me if I'm, because I'm most in the technology, like how I deliver it, will all these things. And do I have the right talent to be able to figure it out? So all of a sudden, that's why it's holy shit, what now?
I love that.
Yep.
It was only recently that we were looking for data analysts, right? So now we're looking for creators and questioners and curiosity. And the question I have for you, Vikram, is for 50 years, you guys have been running your business. What are you most excited about? What do you bring back from Stanford in a real excitement kind of point back to
Yeah. That's a great question, and I think that has a few layers of answers, and I'll try and give you a few. From a business front, I mean, the excitement that the technology world is only going forward and only growing bigger, and that's just I think it's going to be sort of a permanent trend, is what it looks like. So that's always exciting. What's equally exciting is that, as Glover said, if you're selling hours, those hours are gone suddenly. So there's an excitement in terms of like our business model needs to change. What does that new business model look like? Question mark. We build software, but the ease of building software for a lot of people has just increased a lot, right? It's become a lot easier. It's become a lot less expensive. What do we bring to the table that any other company can't? And in our BPO business, in our outsourcing business, we can't be selling people in hours anymore. We're selling outcomes. And what does that look like? How do I help a company build an agentic workforce? When you don't need a human workforce, you need an AI workforce. How do I help a company build that? So those are some questions that we're debating, we're dealing with in terms of how do you paint a picture of what the future of enterprise looks like, and then be a strong participant in that. But I think more at a personal level, the GSB has given me a lot of positivity in terms of how I want to be as a leader and how I want to sort of design the organization internally, how I want to create, how I want to sort of run the organization to create innovation. That's something that personally I don't think we've done as deeply as we should. But I think the cultural transformation that we need to do to be able to achieve that and to become the kind of organization that's a much more innovative, forward-thinking, sort of globally impactful organization, I think building that is super exciting. And I think the GSB has given me a lot of foundation in terms of how to think about those things.
I wonder, Glover, if we can possibly cast our mind back to graduating in 1995, the excitement of Silicon Valley, the freshness of coming out of business school. If I asked, I wish I knew this, what do you think the answer would be? I wish I had known. Not that anybody could have told us, because we wouldn't have listened.
This is a perpetual question of why your kids have to go out and fail on their own.
Exactly.
You can't be told something.
Yeah.
I wish I knew how random the walk would be. There was a great book. It was in maybe the 80s, A Random Walk Down Wall Street. But I actually had this discussion for an alumni function relative to my undergrad, talking to in this case, a bunch of guys, because I played football in college, and I was speaking to current undergrads who are all on the football team and saying, look, guys, if you look at my resume, it might look linear, but that's just because it's on paper. And, leaving and going to Hambrecht Quist and going to Oracle and their venture fund and getting fired from that because they shut it down, to moving to the East Coast with 2 young children and not having a job, and then deciding to start an investment bank, which is nothing I'd ever imagined doing, to figuring out that was a terrible thing for me to do because of my personality and so forth, but still pushing through it for 5 years before then finally getting smart enough to leave and go get a job that fit much more my interest in corporate development in a totally different field. And then getting fired from that job. Well, the position was closed. And I was trying to figure out how to get out of there because the CEO that had taken over was unethical. And so the timing was good, but then having to go figure it out and go to a totally different industry. So the short answer is you fall on your ass a lot of times over a career. I wish I'd known that that's normal. It is absolutely normal to face plant. And the biggest issue is you're like, okay, how do you get up and go figure it out? And this came out when I was having that alumni chat with, now this happened to be a bunch of undergrads, but what was, I suppose, refreshing, because, you know, you got a bunch of sophomores, juniors, seniors in college listening to quote unquote successful guys. It was all guys because it was football players, right? And it happened to be a track on like finance and VC because they wanted people to learn about that industry. And so on paper, everyone's very successful. They are, certainly by month, but every one of them talked about getting fired, screwing something up, you know, closing down a fund or something like that, where, you know, it blew up, and that's part of it. So I wish I'd, you know, it is no magic, you know, golden ticket coming out of Stanford or any other place. And recognizing that, you know, that part of it is just like that. That's just what it is. So.
Beautifully. There's a, and Vikram, as you look forward, you're just about to leave this incredible 2 years. What's the number one thing on your mind besides your business and where you're going to end?
I think what's been on my mind primarily is being intentional about designing what my long-term life looks like. A little bit in terms of, okay, getting close to 30, we'll move back, start getting into work at some point. But in 10, 15 years, what do I want my day to look like? What do I want my life to look like? And how do I be intentional about getting there? Because a lot of it requires 10, 15 years, 20 years of compounding to get there, and sort of putting myself in the right spot at the right time a little bit. So just being a little bit, trying to figure out what that looks like, and then trying to figure out how do I get there in 10 or 15 years.
Right today, the curiosity and the youth that you guys have is inspiring, is absolutely inspiring. Thank you for joining us. For more insights and information, visit my website at katherinemclennan.com. That's spelled KATHARINEMCLENNAN.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the series so you know when the next episode will be, as we continue exchanging wisdom, connecting past, present, and future through the perspectives of Stanford MBA graduates of 1995 and 2025.